At all events, that is where we find descendants of Denmark, the descendants of the Danes in Denmark, and they have attributes similar to those of the Danes. They were known in ancient times as being the strongest of all peoples in the north. They're similar to Samson. They were warriors, as described as the tribe of Dan was. They were foremost amongst the Vikings who established settlements in England and France and in Ireland. And so too, they had have an egalitarian outlook on life, similar to what Dan is commonly ascribed. We also find elements from Dan who settled in Ireland. In Ireland, we find quite a few different Israelite tribes. Our impression is that the predominant tribe in Ireland was actually from the tribe of Asher. Asher was associated with Dan when the tribes came out of Egypt. When the tribes and they settled and they moved through the wilderness, they were encamped around the tabernacle in the center, and the tribes were camped around the tabernacle in groups of 3, 4 groups of 3, 12 tribes in 4 groups of 3. The northern tribe, the northern group was that of Dan, Asher, and Naphtali. Dan, Asher, and Naphtali were the northern group. Dan headed the group. Dan was at the head of the group. The Midrash says that Dan was in the north where darkness comes from. And apparently the Midrash was speaking of the future because it was in the wilderness. There was no darkness there whilst they were in the wilderness. But Dan was destined to go and settle in Scandinavia, where indeed, for 6 months of the year, you do get a great deal of darkness. This is an area of dark associated with darkness because that is what you have for a good portion of the time there. And that in classical traditions of the Greeks, the Roman writings, that is what the northern areas of the world are associated with. So we have Dan there in that region. We have Dan associated with Asher and with the Naphtali. Dan had been the son of Bilhah, Jacob, the fourth known as Israel. He married 4 women. He had 4 wives. His first 2 wives were Rachel and Leah. Rachel and Leah, or Rahel and Leah, they were the daughters of Laban. And he married both of them. And Rachel had a maidservant known as Bilhah. Leah had a maidservant named Zilpah, and so altogether we had 4 women, and Yaakov had children from all of them. And from Bilhah, the maidservant of Rachel, he had 2 children, Dan and Naphtali. And Dan was actually the head, became one of the leading tribes, even though he was descended from a maidservant. And the commentators point out that this was unusual, and it shows a certain ability, a certain assertiveness on the tribe of Dan, so they can advance beyond what would be normally expected of him. And at all events, we have Asher, this association of Dan and Asher, and then Naphtali is repeated. And the Naphtalites actually, according to our understanding, they settled in Norway. Norway and Denmark were associated for a good portion of their history. Denmark ruled over Norway for quite a while, for most of the recorded time. And there's a lot of interreaction between the Danes and the Norwegians. And the Norwegians also have attributes or traits of character similar to those that are ascribed to Naphtali. And we also find Naphtali in Ireland. And we associate Ireland as being dominated by the tribe of Asher, but there were a great number of Danes also in that region. We have the names Donegal. We have a lot of place names in Ireland beginning with Dan or Don. In Hebrew, the pronunciation of the name Dan can also be Don. It's a dialectical thing. There is no distinction between the 2 ways of pronouncing them, actually. And in Danish, in Irish history, Don was the name of one of their major forefathers. Apart from that, we also had the tribe of Dana. Dana is another way of pronouncing Dan. The tribe of Dana was very important in early Irish history. And so too, we have aspects of the Danish character amongst the Irish. One of the very name Dan means Diane, is connected with judgment. Dan, the blessing of Jacob. To Dan said that Dan would judge his people, would judge Dan as a judge. Dan would judge his people as one of the tribes of Israel. And we find a large proportion in the USA of lawyers and of judges of Irish descent, also policemen. A policeman too has the attributes of a judge in many cases. He has to decide things. He has to take judgmental calls. It has the same psychological outlook to a degree as a judge has. So this is what we find. And this is the attributes of Dan, repeated. Also, Dan was is described in the personage of Samson. Samson liked women. He went with other women, as described in the Bible. It was the will of God that he should do this, but he had to have the natural inclinations for this to be done. And this is something that is supposed to be characteristic of the Irish, that they have this inclination, and there are other inclinations that Dan is associated with, and we find in different ways in both the Danes of Denmark and the Dan people, descendants of Dan in Ireland, and even commentators on the Bible on biblical tribal characteristics. They point out there's a difference, expected to be a difference between the Dane in the north and the Dan in the south. Also, we find in the south of England, in the region known as Devon, the southwest of England, that Devon is right on the corner of England. We have a Cornwall right at the edge. And then after Cornwall, we have Devon and a few other counties. All that is known as the West County, the West Country. That in English history was the place where most of the major sailors came from. That is a place that's known for sailing, for ship going. And a good portion of the early English sailors, Drake, Hawkes, Raleigh, all the people in the Elizabethan area, they came from this region of Devon. Even up until the 1700s, a good portion of the captains on the English ships came from Devon, or they came from the West Country in general. They were known, that is with there was a powerhouse of the English Navy. That was what created the English Navy, the earliest English enterprises. And they put themselves to the service of the English. And in earlier times, this region was known as Danonia. It's named after Dan. We find areas in the British Isles, according to the geography of Ptolemy. Ptolemy wrote his geography in about 100 CE, but he based himself on earlier sources, especially one from Tyre and Phoenicia, about 300 BCE. And he is, on the whole, he's reliable, and he gives place names. And he mentions the Damnoni in that region. Damnoni is recognized as another version, another dialectical form of the name Dan. And in early medieval writings, this region was known as Danonia, with the name Dan in it. So so here too we find the aspect of Dan living in ships. Dan in the sea. Dan is associated with the ship going. And we see this as where it was exemplified in these people. I mean, most of the people of the West Country, especially those of Devon. And the population is not that large. Even now, it's about 1 million people, 1,200,000 people, which is not very large in consideration of what the country is or of its importance. And even in the past, it was much less. There's only a small percentage of the English population. But they contributed an overwhelming percentage of early English sailors, explorers, buccaneers, pirates, anyone who was connected with the sea whatsoever. A good portion of them came from that region. Also, geography played a part. The area where they lived, it dominated the ingress and excess of the sea lanes to England. They had good ports there. They could build ships there. It was the country was built for that, and the winds, even the winds, the way of the winds had a favourable influence on sea-going enterprises from that area. And this still was important in history. It was very important in history. Even the Armada, the attempt of the Spanish to invade England in the time of Elizabeth with an enormous number of ships, that was defeated because of adverse winds. More than the actual activities of the English who also fought against the Armada, it was more adverse winds that brought the Armada to destruction. And and all of these factors are actually revelations of divine providence, the fulfillment of prophecy. And Deborah had said, and actually, when you look at the Hebrew, she doesn't say, why is Dan living in ships? She said, why will Dan live in ships? Speaking in the future, why Dan lama yagur oniot? Why would Dan live in ships? That he would live in ships, and that was his destiny. And this is what we find. And we also find attributes of Dan. Dan is considered as someone who is actually frequently quarrels with others. He's inclined to litigation. And in areas associated with Dan, we also find this characteristic in some cases. Apart from that, we also have other tribes. Other tribes also have characteristics of the tribe of the Israelite forefathers that have become quite apparent, quite as they are. An interesting point is that England created a navy using sailors from Devon. But it created a navy, and through the creation of its navy, it became a great mercantile nation. In other words, first came the naval, then came the wealth and the dominance of trade in the world through the navy. And Holland at one stage was a rival of England at an early stage. The English and the Dutch were both allies at times and also rivals. They fought wars one against each other. The Dutch were also great seagoing people. But the Dutch were a seagoing people who first of all, the merchandise, the sailing came first. Then the warriors, the warships came later. It was the opposite. In other words, the Dutch naval enterprise was a reflection, was an outcome of their trading activities, whereas for the English, it was the opposite. The English trading activities were an outcome of their naval accomplishments. The Dutch, you have Holland. Holland is on the sea. The Dutch people live on the sea. About two-thirds of the population of Holland live below the sea level. They live below the sea level. And even those who don't live just a little bit above it. And all over Holland where the people live, that is half the country, but the area where most of the people live, all of the subsoil, you dig down a little bit, is sea sand. They're living on seashores. And this was a prophecy of Jacob to Zebulon. Zebulon said, Jacob, when he blessed Zebulon, he blessed the tribe instead of Zebulon. Zebulon, the Chav Yamim Yishkon. Literally, Zebulon will live on the shores of the sea. And that's a direct translation from Hebrew. Zebulon will live on the shores of the sea. The only country in the world that lives on the shores of the sea is the Dutch. And because they live below the sea level, or they're subject to the threat of inundation, of periodic floods, they have dikes, they have all kinds of waterworks and artificial islands and ramps and pumps that pump the water out. and enclosed areas of the sea, all kinds of forms of protection to protect them from the sea, and to push the sea back and to build up on it. And that's what they do. That's what they've always done, or that is what created them. Most of the Dutch people, they came from Scandinavia, or they came from neighboring areas of Germany, but they were one united people. The Frisians were always there. Others came in from Scandinavia and they settled Holland. They created the Dutch nation. And there was one of the peoples who came in was known as we can find in the geography of Ptolemy, Zebulun. That was you look on the map of Ptolemy of his geography. That's what says Zebulun. And when you understand a little bit about the linguistics and the etymology and what the situation was, that at that time, sometime in the early Christian era, that region of Northern Europe, they lost the use of the sound Z. They probably had it in the past. They lost the use of it. Instead of Z, they used another letter, often S. So you have Zebulon. Zebulun is a replacement for Zebulon. And in Hebrew, Goy, Zebulun Goy means Goy people in Hebrew, people of Zebulun. The actual name of one of the major elements who settled it all is named Zebulun Goy, people of Zebulun. And you have other tribes, other groups who settled there, and quite a few of them have names. Zebulun had several sons. They all became important elements, and these names, the names such as Alon, Halon, and different, and so on, also reflect names of major tribes who settled in that area. So we associate Zebulun with the Dutch, with our Dutch people. And for each and every one of the tribe, we can bring similar proofs, similar points of evidence. We find amongst the Swedes, amongst the people of Sweden, we find the Gad, tribe of Gad. Sweden was created. It was created when there were two rival kingdoms in the area, known as the Swea and the Goths. The Goths could also call themselves Gad. In place names, where you find Gad in that area, it means Goth. So too in biblical Hebrew, as we can see amongst the Yemenite Jews, Goth is another way of pronouncing the word Gad. The normal sound can be pronounced as an O. A D without an accent becomes a TH sound. Gad, Goth are interchangeable. And they were used interchangeably in that area. So Gad is another name for Goth, so another possible way of pronouncing the name Goth, and so it was used. So even that's already a beginning. The Swea with whom the Goths united to create the nation of Sweden, also known as Sueon, according to Tacitus, an early Roman historian. Sueon is a name similar to Shuon. Shuon was a major son of Gad in the Bible. And we have other names of the sons of Gad. We have Heruli. Heruli is similar to the name Haruli, which was an important tribe in Scandinavia, also in the area of Sweden. We have Harudi is another tribe, almost exactly the same. And so we go through all these names and we find tribes of significance that have these same names. And so this is how we identify with these different tribes of different places, with the Israelite tribes, bringing numerous proofs. Another point of interest, it's all interesting, but something that comes to mind is that Gad Yigadunu. Gad will be a Gedud people, will be a group of people. The name Gad was a play on a Hebrew word meaning Gedud, meaning group of people. Gad Yigadunu was a blessing of Jacob to Gad. Gad will become a group of people, and we find the name Gad connected with groups of people. And in Sweden, I read on the internet, you have people from Sweden describing the national characteristics of their country. And they all more or less agree on the major points. So one of the points they say about the Swedes, that they don't have leaders. They don't really like having leaders. They get together in groups and they want a decision to emerge from the group. They don't like people pushing themselves forward. They prefer to reach a consensus. And everything, as much as possible, is done through group agreement. And this was an attribute, according to the commentators, on the name God. This is what the name God presupposed would be, and this is what we find. And we find this throughout, in nearly every case, and this is all worth considering.
I'm just so interested listening to everything you say that, I mean, I always have something to say and ask, but at the moment, I would just say, why don't you just keep going?
Okay. We find the Angles. We find the tribe of Ephraim to be predominant amongst the English. The English came to England in the 400s, between the 400s and 500s CE. They also actually came from the region of Denmark, which is south of Denmark. They came together with the Jutes from Jutland in Denmark, and they also come together with the people known as Saxons, Anglo-Saxons. The Saxons, but they're not the same people as they who are known as Saxons today. They didn't come from the same region of Germany. They came from a northern area. They are more similar to the Frisians, and they came and conquered the area known as England. And the Angles gave their name to England. England is Angleland. That is the name of England. And what does the name Angle mean? So the name Angle on the continent, before they moved, or as they were moving from northern Europe, from the region of Holland and northern Germany and Scandinavia, they were known as Angles and as Agli. Agli was called a diminutive form of the name Angli. It was like a type of nickname that people used for the Angles. Agli in Hebrew means bull calf. Jeremiah in chapter 3 of Jeremiah, he refers to Ephraim as the Agli, as a bull calf, the same name. Also, he uses this name Agli, he uses the letter Ein. An Ein actually can be pronounced as an Am. So Agli could also be pronounced as Angli. And we find the terms Agli and Angli being interchangeable for the Angles. And they gave their name to England, so that England indirectly is named after the bull calf, named after Ephraim. England, the land of the bull calf like a calf, a bull calf, a male calf, was a nickname for Ephraim. So we find Ephraim being associated with English.
Now I have so many questions and comments, I have to restrict them to just a few, because we're coming to the end of our time and we have a long journey together month by month. And as we both know, this isn't an academic exercise for us. With the time for the reunification of the 12 tribes, well, it's not every day we get closer to it, whether it's next week or in 200 years. So the clock is counting down, and it's never too early to start getting people ready. I would be anything that can be done to help people in England, Ireland, Scotland, Wales, Norway, Sweden, Denmark, Finland, Holland, Belgium, parts of Switzerland, Northern Italy, Bohemia, you know, all the places. To one way, it would seem to me, to help awaken Israelite consciousness is to help them remember their own artistic and cultural traditions. I mean, the real old ones, because the farther back you go, the closer you get to that light, the menorah starts to shine. Just like John Hulley would say, what is her name, Enya? Somebody from Ireland who sings the Celtic music, and she and her family, they got a lot of the songs just by going to visit little villages that have been there for zillions of years down in obscure, faraway valleys. It's all there. It's all there. And especially when you have the New World Order globalists who want to erase people's ethnic, religious, and cultural identity and say, well, you just need a chip in you or a number on your arm. We need you as a slave on our Nimrodian latifundia factory farms. A very good antidote to that in Normandy, in Brittany, in Corsica, in all the regions of Europe. And let's talk about Europe. Europe has a big problem. The B'nai Yefet were given the lands from the Urals to the Atlantic. I think they should take them back and send most of the Muslims and Arabs home. Not to dump them on the beaches, have displaced person camps. We don't help the third world by destroying the first world. And one of the ways to help people wake up is music, art, culture, especially the very ancient music, art, and culture. Recover it. And that is one of the ways to reconnect with Israelite roots where the roots are there. And even if it isn't of Israelite root, we're all descended from Adam and Eve, so we're all related to each other. You go back far enough, somebody has somebody in the family from somewhere. Is the reunification of the 12 tribes of Israel is a critical part of a reunification of all the tribes, clans, and families of the sons and daughters of Adam and Eve, which is the goal of it. So I would say music, any of the arts, dance, puppetry, everything should be encouraged, and the link between that and us should be developed, such as Orion was speaking last with those old runes in Hebrew. This is dynamite. I think he had mentioned once that someone came to interview him and never published the results. There are a lot of people out there in the world of journalism and academia who work, and I'm not even saying that's bad, for various of the world's, in my opinion, unintelligent services. And they'll go to people and say, gee, I want to do a film on you. And let's talk about what you do. They get the information, and either they plagiarize it and put their name on it, or they bury it. I think that's what happened to Orion. Somebody wanted to know, tell me what your research shows. And they said, yeah, but we're not going to publish that. Well, here, our job is to get it out. So that would be a comment I would make. I can see from your newsletters that I subscribe to a very lively, ongoing global conversation, which seems to get stronger and not weaker between people all over the world. Then I'd come to a question. How many people do you, if you would give a rough number, I don't even know where you would get it, how many people in Scandinavia, Northwest Europe, the English-speaking countries are involved in lost tribes research movements of one form or another? Any idea what the numbers might be? I know you have whole groups like Herbert Armstrong, the Worldwide Church of God, another split, and then there's the Philadelphia Church of God. Even that one group, that's a lot of people. So if you take all these groups and put them together, as well as people who haven't necessarily affiliated with a group but approach you, any idea how many people we're talking about?
So, all wide world, there's a few million people out there.
No, I don't mean who are descended from the lost tribes. That could be hundreds of millions. I mean who are aware and involved.
Not involved, not so much involved, but have heard the message, believe there's something to it, are potentially interested in it, but don't go anything further than that.
Well, that's a lot of people. A couple of million is a lot of people, especially with all the terrible dislocations going on now with planned destruction of the world's economies and resetting them and ripping up societies. At times like these, people are ready for new ideas or very old ideas, and will wake up and start to find, wait a minute, I'm not going into your gas chambers. Wait a minute. No, I want to live. No, I want to be free. No, I don't want to be part of your tyranny, whatever it may be. Who am I? Where did I come from? This seems to me a time of a global great awakening, like you had in England in the 1700s and America in the 1700s with John Wesley and others. I think we're sitting on a volcano for good, which the sleeping giant is being woken up by the very people who want to destroy all of that. I think there has never been such a propitious time as right now in the last 100 years. That's my feeling.